The words you said to your child this morning might be slowly pulling them apart from the inside, and you have absolutely no idea it's happening. I know that sounds harsh. I know it sounds like the kind of thing someone says to grab your attention and then walks it back 2 minutes later. I'm not walking it back. Because I spent years saying the wrong things to my kid, feeling like a genuinely good parent the entire time, and the evidence that something was off was sitting right in front of me, hiding behind a smile and a desperate need for my approval. Let me tell you what I mean. My daughter Emma used to draw constantly when she was little. Every afternoon, the kitchen table would disappear under sheets of paper covered in her messy, wonderful, completely unhinged little worlds. Dogs with wings, houses made of fruit, purple skies with two suns. I loved it. And every single time she slid a drawing across the table toward me, I would look at it with this big, warm smile and say something like, "That's incredible," or "You are so talented," or "Wow, look at this." And she would light up. Every time. That little spark in her eyes when I said those words, it felt like the best thing in the world. It felt like love. It felt like exactly what a parent is supposed to do. Then, one afternoon, she stopped sliding drawings across the table. Just like that. The paper was still there, the markers were still there, but she would start something, look at it for a few seconds, and push it to the side. One day I sat next to her and watched it happen in real time. She drew a few lines, paused, glanced at me, drew a few more, then quietly folded the paper in half and put it face down on the table. She was waiting for a verdict. Before she even finished, she had learned, somewhere in all those warm and loving moments with me, that the drawing only mattered when I told her it did. That moment sat in my chest like a stone for days. Because I hadn't taught her that on purpose, I had taught her that with the kindest words I knew. And that is exactly the kind of thing I want to talk about today, because it is far more common than anyone admits, and it runs much deeper than one afternoon at a kitchen table. Here is the part that I find hardest to accept, even now. The words that do the quietest damage are not the harsh ones. They are not the moments when we lose our patience or say something we regret. Those moments are obvious. We feel them immediately. We apologize. We try to do better. The words I'm talking about are the ones that feel completely right as they leave your mouth. Warm, supportive, loving. They are the words your parents said to you, and their parents said before them. And somewhere along the way, everyone just agreed that this is simply what good parenting sounds like. And so we never questioned it. I never questioned it. Not until Emma put that drawing face down on the table. If any of this is already making you think of a specific moment with your own child, stay with that feeling. Don't push it away. It means you're paying exactly the right kind of attention. And what comes next is going to give you something genuinely useful to do about it. If this kind of conversation matters to you, subscribe and leave a like. It helps more parents find this, and honestly, that is the whole point. So here is where I want to start. Not with a list, not with a research study, but with a parent I came across whose story stopped me cold, because it mirrors something I think a lot of us have quietly lived through without ever naming it out loud. This parent, a guy named David, coached youth sports on weekends and spent most of his weekdays working from home while his two kids rattled around the house nearby. By his own description, he was present, patient, the kind of dad who showed up. He was also, without realizing it, running a near-constant commentary on everything his kids did. Not critical commentary, encouraging commentary. He praised the way his son tied his shoes. He celebrated every finished meal. He cheered a completed puzzle like it was a championship moment. It was enthusiastic and genuine and completely exhausting for everyone involved, though nobody would have said so at the time. The shift came not from a book or a podcast, but from a single, quiet observation his wife made one evening. She said, "Have you noticed that Jake never starts anything unless you're watching?" David thought about it and realized she was right. His 7-year-old son had quietly learned to wait. Not out of laziness, not out of fear, but because somewhere in the warmth of all that encouragement, the doing and the being seen doing had become completely inseparable. The experience had fused with the approval, and without the approval, the experience felt incomplete. That observation cracked something open for David, and it is going to crack something open for us too, starting right now, with the first of 5 things we say every single day that quietly work against everything we actually want for our children. So David had his moment of clarity, and now I want to give you the first trap in full, because this is where most parents are losing ground without even knowing the game is being played. The trap is this. We have turned ourselves into a constant rating system for our children. Every finished meal, every tied shoelace, every drawing slid across a table gets a score from us. Not a numerical score, but a verbal one. Wonderful, amazing, so good, you did it. And it happens so automatically, so reflexively, that most parents genuinely cannot imagine what they would say instead. The silence feels cold. The absence of praise feels like withholding love. So we keep rating, keep scoring, keep handing out those little verbal gold stars, and the child keeps learning to collect them. Here is what David told me happened next, after his wife pointed out that Jake never started anything without an audience. David decided to try something that felt genuinely uncomfortable. For 1 week, he stopped evaluating. Not stopped engaging, just stopped judging. When Jake finished building something out of cardboard and tape in the living room, a messy tower that was leaning badly to one side, David did not say, "Great job," or "I love it." He walked over, sat on the floor next to it, and said, "You used almost the whole roll of tape on this." That was it. No verdict, just an observation. Jake looked at him for a second, like he was waiting for something else. And when it did not come, something interesting happened. Jake turned back to the tower, studied it, and said, "I think it needs more on the bottom." Then he kept going. He did not look up for approval. He did not wait for a cue. He just kept working, on his own terms, because the doing had stopped being about the reaction and started being about the thing itself. David said it was one of the quietest and most powerful parenting moments he had ever experienced. A Tuesday afternoon, cardboard and tape, nobody saying anything particularly brilliant, and somehow everything shifted. The reason this works cuts straight to how a child builds motivation. When we evaluate constantly, the child's internal compass slowly hands over its controls to us. They stop asking themselves whether something feels right or interesting or satisfying, and they start asking whether we will approve. That is not a small thing. That is the whole engine of curiosity being rewired to run on someone else's fuel. And when that fuel is not available, when we are in another room or distracted or simply not there, the engine stalls. What David did with that one quiet observation, "You used almost the whole roll of tape," was hand the controls back. He described what he saw without deciding what it meant, and in that small gap where the verdict used to be, Jake found his own answer. Try it tonight. Whatever your child finishes, resist the score. Describe what you actually see. You worked on that for a long time. You tried a different way when the first one did not work. You filled the whole page. No judgment in either direction, just your eyes open and your voice steady. Watch what grows in the space where the gold star used to be. Now here is where it gets harder, because the second trap is not about what we say after something happens, it is about what we say while it is happening. And this one is wired even deeper, because it comes from a place that feels completely like love. Watch any parent at a park or a playground, and you will hear it within minutes. The same 2 words, over and over, cutting through the air like a reflex. Watch out, slow down, be careful. And I want you to really sit with this, because every single one of those warnings sounds like protection. It sounds like a parent doing their job. But what the child's nervous system is actually receiving is something much more corrosive than a scraped knee. Emma went through a phase around age 6 where she loved climbing things. Trees, fences, the big rock formation at the far end of the park near our house. And I was a mess every single time. I would stand below whatever she was scaling with my arms slightly out, my jaw tight, my eyes tracking every handhold, and I would narrate the danger like a sports commentator who had never once relaxed in their life. Careful on that branch. That rock looks slippery. Not too high. Okay, not too high. My voice was calm. My intention was love. But what Emma was absorbing, one warning at a time, was a very specific message about herself and her body. The message was, you cannot trust your own instincts. Someone else needs to manage your physical experience for you. I did not see it until the day she stopped halfway up a tree, looked down at me, and just climbed back down without saying anything. She was not scared. Her face was not scared. It was something closer to tired. She had stopped because my anxiety had become louder than her own excitement, and there was simply no room left for her to have her own experience of the climb. That image has stayed with me for years. A child climbing back down not because the tree was too tall, but because the noise around the tree was. What if the most damaging thing you ever said to your child was also the thing they heard most often and loved the most in that moment? I kept thinking about Emma on that tree, about the way she climbed back down, not because she was afraid, but because I had filled all the available space with my own fear. And I thought I had learned something from that. I thought the lesson was about letting go, about stepping back, about trusting her body more than my anxiety. And I had learned that, partly. But then the third trap caught me completely off guard, because it came dressed in something that felt nothing like fear. It felt like pride. Emma was 8 when she started doing mental math faster than most adults around her. She would hear a number problem and have the answer before the question was fully out of your mouth. It was genuinely remarkable. And I did what every proud parent does. I told her so, constantly, and in the biggest terms I could find. You are so quick. You have such a natural gift for this. Some kids just have it, and you are one of them. I meant every word. I was not performing. I was in genuine awe of her. But I was also, without knowing it, building a cage around her out of the very best materials I had. The cage did not show up immediately. It never does. It showed up about a year later, when her class moved into more challenging material and the answers stopped coming instantly. I remember the evening she sat at the kitchen table with a worksheet in front of her, the lamp throwing a warm yellow circle across the paper, her pencil completely still. She had been sitting there for 20 minutes and had not written a single thing. I asked her what was going on, and she said something that has never left me. She said, I think I might not actually be good at this. Not, this is hard. Not, I need help. But, I might not actually be good at this. At 8 years old, she had already decided that difficulty was evidence of a flaw in her identity rather than a normal part of learning something new. And I had built that belief in her, one compliment at a time. Here is what happens inside a child when you label them by their ability. The label becomes the thing they are protecting, not the skill they are building. Every new challenge becomes a test of whether the label still fits. And the safest strategy, the one that guarantees the label stays intact, is to avoid the challenges where they might fail. So, they stop reaching. They stay inside the edges of what they already know they can do. The child who was told she was naturally gifted becomes the teenager who only takes classes she knows she can pass, because a bad grade is not just a bad grade. It is proof that the thing she was told she never actually was at all. What those other cultures do instead is so simple, it almost sounds like nothing. They skip the label entirely. They point to the action. You tried that 4 different ways before it worked. You came back to it even after you wanted to quit. You figured that out on your own. Those sentences do not describe a fixed trait. They describe a choice the child made. And a choice can be made again tomorrow. That is not a small distinction. That is the entire difference between a child who leans into difficulty and one who quietly retreats from it. After that evening at the kitchen table, I started changing how I spoke to Emma about the things she did well. It felt strange at first, almost cold, like I was holding back something warm. But the warmth did not disappear. It just moved. Instead of landing on what she was, it landed on what she did. And over time, I watched her relationship with hard things change in a way that no amount of "you are so gifted" ever produced. Now here is where the story takes a turn I did not see coming, and it is the one that hit me the hardest of all 5. Because everything we have talked about so far, the approval loop, the fear language, the identity labels, all of it lives mostly in the realm of achievement and behavior. But the 4th trap lives somewhere much more personal. It lives inside a child's emotional world. And the damage it does is the kind that does not show up for years. I remember the afternoon it became impossible to ignore. Emma was 9. She had lost something at school, a small thing objectively, a notebook she had been keeping drawings in for months. She came through the front door, dropped her bag in the hallway, and the sound that came out of her was not a cry exactly. It was something rawer than that, something that filled the whole house. And my first instinct, the one that arrived before I had a single conscious thought, was to make it stop. There is a version of your child that you will never meet, and it is the version that got quietly erased every time you said just 2 words in the wrong moment. I left off with Emma at 9 years old, standing in the hallway with that raw sound filling the house, and my first instinct being to shut it down. I want to stay there for a moment, because that instinct is worth understanding. It was not cruelty. It was not impatience. Not really. It was something much more human than that. When your child is in pain, your nervous system reads it as a problem that needs solving. The sound is uncomfortable. The sight of them upset is uncomfortable. And the fastest way to fix your own discomfort is to stop the thing causing it. So we say, "It is okay. You are fine. Come on, it is not that big a deal." And the child stops, or tries to, and we feel relieved, and we call it parenting. What I did with Emma that afternoon was exactly that. I crouched down, put my hand on her shoulder, and said, "Hey, it is just a notebook. We can get another one." Said it warmly, said it gently, completely meant it. And she went quiet almost immediately, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and went to her room. I thought I had helped. I felt like I had handled it well. It was not until much later that I understood what had actually happened in that hallway. Emma had not stopped feeling the loss of that notebook. She had just learned in that moment that the feeling was too much for me to sit with, that her grief, even over something small, was a problem I needed her to solve for me by stopping it. And so she did. She got very good at solving that problem. She got so good at it that by the time she was 11 or 12, she had stopped bringing her upsets home at all. Not because things stopped bothering her, but because she had learned that there was no room for them in the space between us. I noticed it gradually, the way you notice a draft in a house. You feel it before you can locate it. She was fine, always fine, relentlessly fine. And something about that fineness started to feel like a door that had been quietly shut. I would ask her how her day was, and the answer was always some version of good. I would ask if anything was wrong, and she would smile and say no. The smile was real enough on the surface. But underneath it was the very specific kind of calm that comes not from being okay, but from having decided that not okay is not allowed. That is what telling a child to stop feeling actually builds. Not resilience, not emotional strength. It builds a very convincing performance of being fine. And it runs so deep that eventually the child themselves can barely tell the difference between the performance and the real thing. What I started doing, too late but not too late, was staying. Just physically staying in the presence of the feeling, without trying to redirect it or resolve it or make it smaller. When Emma came home upset, I would sit nearby and say things like, "That sounds like it was really frustrating," or "I can see that really got to you." Not fixing, not minimizing, just naming what I could see, out loud, calmly, as if the feeling were a perfectly reasonable thing to have, which it was. It felt almost too simple to be doing anything. But slowly, over weeks and months, the door started opening again. Not all the way, but enough. The fifth trap followed directly from this one, and it lives in a completely different moment, but does the same kind of damage at a different level. Because once I had started letting Emma's emotions take up space, once I had stopped rushing to make discomfort disappear, I started noticing something else I was still doing constantly, something I reached for every single time she pushed back on a rule, a boundary, a decision I had made. She would ask why, and I would feel that particular cocktail of tiredness and mild irritation, and instead of finding a real answer, I would just reach for the oldest shortcut in parenting. Because I said so. Because I am the parent. Because that is the rule. It worked every time in the short term. She would go quiet, maybe with a look on her face that I chose not to examine too closely, and the moment would pass. But I had no idea what that phrase was teaching her underneath the surface, and when I finally understood it, it stopped me cold. Every rule you ever enforced without a reason taught your child that power is its own justification. And that lesson will outlast every single thing you think you taught them on purpose. I want to pick up exactly where I left off, because the fifth trap connects directly to everything that came before it. The approval loop, the fear language, the identity labels, the silenced emotions, they all share a common thread underneath. They all quietly remove the child from their own experience and hand that experience over to someone else. The gold star replaces inner satisfaction. The warning replaces body awareness. The label replaces self-assessment. The shushing replaces emotional honesty. And because I said so, replaces thinking entirely. That is what I eventually understood about those moments with Emma when I reached for authority instead of explanation. I was not just ending an argument. I was sending a signal that landed somewhere much deeper than the argument itself. The signal was, your questions are inconvenient. Curiosity is something to manage, not something to honor. The person with more power does not need to justify themselves to you. And a child who receives that signal enough times stops asking why. Not because they have learned to trust the rules, but because they have learned that asking is pointless. I saw this clearly one evening when Emma was 10. She had a friend over after school, a girl named Lily, and at some point I told them both it was time to wrap up and for Lily to head home. Emma asked why, and I was tired, genuinely tired, and without thinking I said, "Because I said so, that is why." Lily went quiet immediately. Emma went quiet too. But later that night, after Lily had gone, Emma came to find me in the kitchen and asked the question again. Not defiantly, genuinely. She just wanted to understand. And standing there in the kitchen with the kettle going and the day almost over, I could not actually remember what my reason had been. I had invoked my authority to end a conversation I did not even have a real answer for. That moment embarrassed me more than I expected, because I realized I had been doing it for years, and not always because I was too tired to explain. Sometimes I did it because explaining felt like negotiating, and I had confused the two. Explaining a rule to a child is not giving them a vote. It is giving them the wiring to understand how the world works. Those are completely different things, and I had been treating them as the same. So I started explaining, even when I was tired. Even when the explanation was imperfect. Even when I knew Emma might push back on it, which she often did, and which was fine, because a child who pushes back on a reason is thinking. A child who goes silent when authority speaks is just waiting for the authority to leave the room. The change was not instant, but it was real, and it connected to something larger that I had been slowly learning across all 5 of these shifts, something I did not fully have language for until much later. Here is what that something is, and this is where I want to land before we reach the end of this. I had spent years believing that my job as a parent was to fill Emma up, fill her with praise, with protection, with identity, with emotional management, with rules and the enforcement of them. I thought parenting was a process of adding things to a child. And almost every instinct I had, every phrase I reached for automatically, came from that belief. Good job was me adding approval. Be careful was me adding protection. You are so gifted was me adding identity. Stop crying was me adding emotional management. Because I said so was me adding order. All of it was me, filling, shaping, directing, deciding. What I slowly and reluctantly learned is that the best thing I could do for Emma was almost the opposite of that. It was to create space instead of fill it, to observe instead of evaluate, to ask instead of warn, to describe what she did instead of labeling what she was, to sit with her feelings instead of resolving them, to explain the world instead of just ruling it. Every single shift moved in the same direction, away from me being the source of her experience and toward her being the source of it herself. And the Emma I know now, older, more herself than she has ever been, is not the product of my best speeches or my most enthusiastic praise. She is the product of the moments I chose to say less and trust more. The moments I sat on the floor next to a leaning cardboard tower and said nothing except, "You used almost the whole roll of tape." The moments I stayed in the room when she was upset and did not try to fix it. The moments I found a real reason for a rule instead of hiding behind my own authority. Those moments did not feel powerful when they were happening. They felt quiet, almost unremarkable. But they were the ones that built something in her that no amount of good job ever could. Something that belongs entirely to her and cannot be taken away when the praise stops coming. Here is what this whole story comes down to. The words we say to our children every single day are not just words. They are the architecture of the person those children are quietly becoming. And the most dangerous ones are never the harsh words we regret and apologize for. They are the warm, automatic, well-meaning words we never think to question at all. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it honestly. Think about your own childhood. Think about which of these 5 things was said to you the most. The constant evaluation, the fear warnings, the identity label, the emotional shutdown, the authority without reason. And then ask yourself, where do you still feel that in your life today? Where do you still wait for someone else to tell you that what you did was good enough? Where do you still feel like your emotions are slightly too much for the room? Where do you still follow rules without knowing why, or avoid challenges that might prove the label wrong? Write it in the comments. I mean it. Not because it is a question with a tidy answer, but because naming it out loud is the first move in the only direction that matters. If this reached you today, if something in it made you think of a moment with your child or a moment from your own childhood that you have never quite examined, share it with one person who needs to hear it. And if you want more of these conversations, subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely helps this reach the parents who are looking for exactly this, right now, tonight, standing in their kitchen, wondering if they are doing it right. You are asking the question. That already means something.